When nations engage in trade, they sometimes employ various tools to influence the flow of goods across their borders. One of the most fundamental and frequently used of these tools is the tariff. Tariffs are essentially taxes imposed on imported goods, making foreign products more expensive for local buyers. This increase in price directly affects the competitiveness of imported goods within a domestic market. They're used to protect domestic industries, shielding them from foreign competition by artificially increasing the cost of imported alternatives. By making imported goods pricier, tariffs give local products a competitive edge, allowing them to maintain or increase their market share. This can be particularly important for nascent industries or those struggling to compete with established foreign players. Beyond protectionism, tariffs can also generate revenue for governments, providing a source of income that can be used to fund various public programs and services. This revenue can be allocated to a wide range of public services, from infrastructure development and education to healthcare and social welfare programs. Historically, tariffs were a major income source for governments, often representing a significant portion of their overall revenue. This was especially true before income taxes became widespread, making tariffs a crucial tool for funding state activities. Today, while income taxes and other forms of revenue have become more prevalent, tariffs are less central for revenue generation in many developed economies. However, they are still significant, especially when applied broadly across numerous product categories or levied at high rates, particularly in developing nations. Beyond their economic impact, tariffs are also powerful tools in international negotiations, serving as leverage in discussions between countries. These negotiations often involve complex discussions about trade agreements, market access, and the overall balance of economic relations. Countries may strategically use tariffs to pressure others, aiming to influence their policies and behaviors in the international arena. This pressure can be exerted to change trade practices, open up markets, or address perceived imbalances in trade relationships. Tariffs can also be implemented as retaliation for perceived unfairness, such as when a country believes another is engaging in protectionist measures or unfair trade practices. This multifaceted role makes tariffs central to global economic strategy. They are a key instrument in shaping international trade relations and conducting diplomacy. For consumers, tariffs usually translate to higher prices, impacting the cost of everyday goods and services. This is particularly evident on imported goods, like cars, where tariffs can significantly increase the final price. The same applies to electronics, where tariffs can make imported gadgets and devices more expensive for consumers. Businesses relying on imports face increased costs due to tariffs, which can squeeze their profit margins and force them to make difficult decisions. Ultimately, these increased costs can lead to higher prices for everyone, as businesses pass on the burden of tariffs to consumers. While tariffs are often intended to protect local jobs and bolster domestic industries, they can sometimes backfire, leading to unintended consequences and economic disruptions. These negative effects can include harming other sectors of the economy or provoking retaliatory tariffs from other countries, escalating trade tensions. The result is often a more complicated and unpredictable global trade landscape characterized by uncertainty and potential instability. This can create a challenging economic environment for businesses, consumers, and governments alike. Tariffs are never just about economics. They are intertwined with broader political considerations and strategic objectives. They're about power, politics, and global influence, reflecting the complex interplay of national interests and international relations. Every tariff decision ripples through supply chains, impacting jobs, consumer prices, and the overall health of the global economy, affecting everyday life for people around the world. Understanding tariffs is key to navigating the complexities of international trade and comprehending the forces that shape the global economy. It's essential for grasping the stakes in global trade disputes and making informed decisions about economic policy. In late May 2025, the Trump administration shocked the world with an unexpected and aggressive trade maneuver. The announcement reverberated across continents, sending ripples of uncertainty through financial institutions and trade organizations alike, by threatening a 50% tariff on all European Union imports. This wasn't a subtle adjustment or a minor tweak to existing trade policies. It was a bold, unprecedented move that threatened to fundamentally alter the landscape of international commerce. This wasn't a targeted measure aimed at specific sectors or industries. It was a sweeping escalation, far beyond previous threats of 20%. The sheer scale of the proposed tariffs indicated a significant shift in the administration's approach to trade relations, signaling a willingness to embrace a more confrontational stance. The immediacy of the threat, possibly within a week, sent global markets into turmoil. Investors scrambled to assess the potential fallout, and analysts worked overtime to predict the long-term consequences of such a drastic policy change. Such a drastic move signaled a willingness to risk a severe trade conflict with a major partner. The potential ramifications extended far beyond mere economic considerations, threatening to strain diplomatic ties and undermine years of carefully cultivated cooperation. The EU-US trade relationship is one of the world's largest, representing a significant portion of global commerce and investment, so the impact would be global. Industries reliant on transatlantic trade braced for potential disruptions, while consumers feared the prospect of higher prices and reduced product availability. Financial markets reacted with anxiety, as traders and investors grappled with the uncertainty surrounding the future of EU-US trade relations, fearing supply chain disruptions and higher costs. Businesses scrambled to reassess their strategies, exploring alternative sourcing options and contingency plans to mitigate the potential impact of the tariffs. The announcement marked the most severe escalation in trade tensions since the global trade war began, surpassing previous confrontations and signaling a new level of intensity in international trade disputes. Previous calm, especially after a softer stance on China, had lulled some into a sense of complacency, suggesting that the worst of the trade conflicts might be behind us, was shattered, replaced by a renewed sense of unease and uncertainty about the future of global trade. The threat raised doubts about the stability of international trade agreements, casting a shadow over the long-term viability of established trade frameworks. Was this a negotiating tactic, a high-stakes gamble designed to extract concessions from the European Union? Or the start of a full-blown economic confrontation? A protracted and damaging trade war with potentially devastating consequences for both sides? The world watched, uncertain, as leaders and policymakers on both sides of the Atlantic weighed their options and considered the potential ramifications of their decisions. About the future of global economic cooperation, and whether the principles of free trade and open markets would continue to guide international relations. The stakes had never been higher for transatlantic trade, with the potential for significant economic disruption and lasting damage to international relations hanging in the balance. The U.S. announced the tariff threat, a move that sent ripples through international markets. The official line from Washington was that this action was primarily intended to jumpstart stalled trade talks, which had been dragging on for months without any significant breakthroughs. The aim was to reignite negotiations with the EU and other key allies who had become increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress. The administration, facing mounting pressure both domestically and internationally, wanted faster progress on trade agreements. They felt a sense of urgency to deliver tangible results. To achieve this accelerated pace, the U.S. government strategically used tariffs as leverage, hoping to force concessions from its trading partners. Protecting American industries and jobs was not just an economic goal, but also a key theme that resonated deeply with the administration's political base. This message was particularly appealing to voters in regions that had been disproportionately hit by global competition and the outsourcing of manufacturing jobs. Implementing tough trade measures also played well politically, providing a narrative of strength and resolve on the international stage. These policies were effective in energizing the administration's base, who saw them as a fulfillment of campaign promises. The timing of the tariff announcements suggested that domestic politics were indeed at play, influencing the administration's decision-making process. The administration kept a close eye on approval ratings, carefully calibrating its trade policies to maintain public support. Beyond the political considerations, the U.S. also aimed to rebalance trade deficits, which had been a long-standing concern for policymakers. This was particularly true in its trade relationship with the EU, where the U.S. perceived a significant imbalance. However, the question remained, whether this aggressive approach would ultimately yield better deals for the U.S., or whether it would instead spark retaliation from affected countries, leading to a global trade war, was a subject of heated debate among economists and policymakers alike. The pursuit of a fairer deal, as defined by the U.S. administration, became the central objective. This ambition was at the very heart of the administration's overall trade strategy, shaping its interactions with the rest of the world. The EU faced a tough choice after the US tariff threat. Retaliatory tariffs were on the table, targeting iconic American products, but the EU's 27 members had to stay united, despite differing interests. Some favored negotiation, others wanted a strong response. Key industries, cars, aerospace, agriculture, stood to lose big in a trade war. The EU weighed the risks of retaliation versus inaction, knowing both carried costs. Beyond economics, the EU had to consider the long-term impact on its US relationship. A trade war could damage not just economies but decades of political and security ties. EU leaders faced a delicate balancing act: defend their interests without destroying a vital partnership. A US-EU tariff war would shake the entire global economy, not just the two regions involved. Market volatility would spike, and businesses worldwide would brace for disruption. Countries like Japan doubted the US would follow through, but the threat was real enough to cause alarm. Even the UK, with its unique post-Brexit deals, would feel the fallout. A major trade conflict could fragment the global trading system, encouraging protectionism everywhere. The rules-based order that's driven growth for decades would be at risk. Most countries watched anxiously, hoping for de-escalation, but preparing for turbulence. The US threat against the EU echoed its earlier trade war with China: big tariffs, big risks. The goals were similar: reduce deficits, protect industries, and force changes in trade practices. But the EU is a bloc of allies, not a strategic rival like China, making the stakes different. The US-China conflict showed tariffs can backfire, raising costs and triggering retaliation. Observers wondered if the US had learned from that experience or was repeating old mistakes. The memory of the China trade war loomed large as the world braced for another showdown. Economists warned that 50% tariffs could tip the global economy into recession. Prices on everything from cars to food would rise, fueling inflation and squeezing households. Business leaders on both sides of the Atlantic urged de-escalation, fearing chaos in supply chains and lost competitiveness. International organizations like the WTO and IMF sounded alarms about the threat to the global trading system. A trade war could erode decades of progress and encourage worldwide protectionism. Some analysts saw the threat as a risky negotiating tactic, but the danger of escalation was real. Even a bluff could damage trust and make future cooperation harder. The consensus: the risks far outweighed any possible gains. The US tariff threat landed just before the G7 summit in Canada, raising the stakes for global diplomacy. The G7, meant to foster cooperation, now faced division over trade. Leaders had to decide whether to push back, mediate, or risk a fractured alliance. Canada, as host, was caught in the middle, trying to keep the summit on track. The summit could either diffuse tensions or highlight deepening rifts among Western allies. The US might use the event to press its case. Others could rally for the rules-based system. The outcome would shape the future of global economic leadership. As of late May 2025, the world stands at a crossroads. Negotiation could avert disaster, but a trade war would mean higher prices, job losses, and global recession. Even if extreme tariffs are avoided, ongoing tension could slow growth and erode the benefits of globalization. For ordinary people, the stakes are real: higher costs, job risks, and economic uncertainty. The choices made by leaders in the coming weeks will shape the future of trade and daily life for millions. The world waits, hoping for diplomacy over confrontation. The next moves will determine whether global cooperation survives or fractures. The impact will be felt in every household, business, and community worldwide.